Hello, Kitti. Just want to try your microphone to make sure that it's working for you.
All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Perfect. We will start this presentation in 2 minutes. Okay, it's 1 o'clock, and to be respectful of everyone's time, we're gonna go ahead and start this presentation. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to VolunteerNC's 2024 Learning Together Disaster Series. We are excited about restarting the series, and this series will run from January to May. We have an exciting agenda that features 2 presentations per month. My name is Luz Sanabria Reyes, and I am VolunteerNC's Disaster Services Manager and the host for this series. Today, let me make sure that I'm able to continue. Okay, some housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to the VolunteerNC's YouTube channel. Today's presentation is scheduled to last 1 hour. This includes Q&A. Save your questions for the end of the presentation and keep your microphones muted to prevent interruptions. All materials for this presentation will be emailed probably, I would say, within 3 days after the presentation. Let's see, and we have more people coming in, so let's... Our speakers for today are George Strunk, Long-Term Recovery Group Committee Chair for the North Carolina Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, Kitti Hardison, Recovery Director for the Craven County Disaster Response Alliance, and Community Relations Manager for United Way of Coastal Carolina, Kristi Kulberg, Secretary of Well, actually, corrections. She is the new president of the North Carolina Voluntary Organizations Active and Disaster and director of the of operations for Craven County Disaster Response Alliance. And lastly, we have Bob Fuller, chair of the Pamlico County Disaster Recovery Coalition and president of Pamlico Chamber of Commerce. They all going to be speaking today about long-term recovery groups and voluntary organizations. And okay, let me go back. Our first presenter is George Strunk, long-term recovery orientation. Go ahead, George.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking some time out of your busy day, I'm sure. North Carolina VOAD has used the national VOAD model for 24 years now with much success, and there's been much to cover in this limited amount of time we have this afternoon. So please provide feedback or contact information or questions in the chat as we go along, in case we run out of time towards the end. We're very interested in answering all of your questions. We currently have 14 active LTRGs or Disaster Recovery Alliances or VOADs in North Carolina, and 2 of them are speaking today. Borrowing from the national model, we hope to lighten up your information and understanding of what regular citizens who are properly coached can do to assist your community in time of disaster. Next slide, please. What is a long-term recovery group? What are they called? Just as we don't require stringent rules, we allow communities to name themselves. So a long-term recovery group is a cooperative body made up of representatives from faith-based, nonprofit, government, business, and other organizations working within a community to assist individuals and families as they recover from disaster. Next slide, please. We have long-term recovery organizations, long-term recovery committees, long-term recovery groups, and everything in between. We used to be interfaiths way back when we started in 1999. That was because the organization and thrust of the recovery was run by the faith groups, the Catholics and the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and the Methodists and all the others got together and contributed most of the money for long-term recovery and recovery following disasters. Next slide, please. So we will assist in the organization of long-term recovery groups following a disaster. FEMA, North Carolina Emergency Management, and local emergency management will host a meeting that will be attended by a VolunteerNC, for example, the governor's office, and North Carolina VOAD. And we will attempt to convince the local population that their best recovery is driven from within and not from an organization coming from the outside and telling you how to do it or why to do it. We try to take your thoughts and make them work, and helping with our model establish an organization. Other than that, the North Carolina VOAD and Long-Term Recovery Group Committee will work in blue sky conditions like we have today between disasters. For those of you that don't know, we had a limited operation at the Emergency Operations Center this past week and may go back into operation for the weather events following. In any case, North Carolina Emergency Management Volunteer Agency Liaison, Phil Triplett, the local emergency managers, and North Carolina VOAD LTRG committee will help you organize. And we have 3 basic requirements, and not all of them are mandatory. It depends on how ready you are and how willing you are to get into the weeds. But we will require a bylaws to be established. We hope that you would establish a board of directors to oversee the running of the organization and maybe find capable members that should join the organization. And lastly, we would encourage you to get a 501c3 so that you could operate as a nonprofit organization. It really is helpful in the long run. There are 3 resources here that are available on the national website, and we will make those available after the presentation. It's a really simple process. There are some rules that we go by to help you establish, and we cover a lot more details, and they will be covered to some degree by the next 2 speakers. So I will turn it over now to Kristi. And
thank you, George. So I am Kristi Kulberg. I'm the Director of Operations at Craven County Disaster Recovery Alliance. And Kitti Hardison is the Recovery Director for Craven County Disaster Recovery Alliance. We were founded in 2016, right after Hurricane Matthew. Liz, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to do a brief introduction, then I'm going to turn it over to Kitti and let her kind of tell you about forming an LTRG. So our mission, the reason I left this on here was because I think it kind of incorporates what an LTRG stands for. So our mission is to strengthen area-wide disaster coordination through information sharing, simplifying the access to available resources for individuals and families, and resolving cases with unmet needs from disaster. So basically, we're here to streamline things for homeowners and for applicants in general, trying to get their needs met following a disaster with as minimal additional stress on them as possible. Next slide, please. On average, a hurricane recovery effort lasts about 7 to 10 years. We say that very loosely. We're 6 years out from Hurricane Florence. Katrina was in 2005, and those areas are still recovering. So that's a very loose estimate. Most long-term recovery groups form right after a major disaster, and then they disband when the funds run out, which is often within 2 to 5 years. As many LTRGs know, it gets harder and harder to replenish funds the further away you get from a storm. Everybody's willing to donate and fund you right after a storm, but as new storms come in, funds start going to those newer storms. So things start to get complicated for the long-term recovery groups. We're kind of the people that never leave. We're generally made up of local people and, you know, a lot of volunteers that want to help their neighbors, their families, whatnot, kind of work in our own county or region. And there's really no risk of us pulling out to go to the next disaster site. One thing you see a lot of in disaster is, you know, some of those nationwide organizations will come in for, you know, a few months or a year or two, and then they leave. In those areas that were impacted, unfortunately, when people see those organizations leave, they kind of think the disaster recovery is over, that there's no more hope. So we're here trying to continue those efforts and help people to know that there's still help out there available. Next slide, please. Overall, we try to meet as many needs as we possibly can. We try to help with case management, education and preparedness, referral services. We try to take some of that repeating their story over and over and over off of them. As a storm survivor myself, I can tell you I had to tell my storm story about 40 times over before I finally started getting some answers. And that is just adds to the trauma that you're already going through. So with case management, we try to do that for them. We hear their story, we learn their scenario, their situation, and then we go in and tell that story for them to our partners trying to advocate and get them assistance. the avocation being a liaison between that homeowner and the partners, the resource providers, doing a resource table, emotional and spiritual support. That's okay, Liz, let it go. Meeting some of those unmet needs. And this is where I'm going to let Kitti kind of come in. Kitti was actually here when CCDRA formed. She was one of the first people around the table trying to find answers. And I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about that.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I'll say that John Robinson, who many of you know, moved to our county, Craven County, following Hurricane Matthew, which was 2 years before Hurricane Florence. We had already been talking at United Way because we had worked with other counties. We'd worked with Pamlico, and we had also worked after Hurricane Floyd in 1999 here in Craven County and other counties that we cover for United Way. So since we had already kind of been around the table and worked in long-term recovery, we talked to John, and John called together a meeting of community folks, and we all kind of met together at a church and decided that, yes, we wanted to form a long-term recovery group for Craven County. So the group of folks that were there that wanted to stay committed, along with North Carolina Emergency Management and the help with FEMA, we did our bylaws and got established as a long-term recovery group, and were able to get our routine use letter from FEMA to help with clients after Hurricane Matthew. We continued to meet every other week until Hurricane Florence hit, which was 2 years later. So we were luckily in a state that we could just jump right in with Hurricane Florence, forming committees and things like that. So then we kind of hit the ground running with that. So committees were formed after Hurricane Florence. One of the most important one was our resource table, where we just kind of started as a collaborative, where we worked with all of the partners that were in our community, helping with disaster relief and bringing everybody around the table. We then started doing our own in-house case management, which then we started work with the state case management to help clients in Craven County recover from Hurricane Florence. So we definitely are not the experts. We just kind of stepped in and just kind of have learned along the way. We know that lots of long-term recovery groups don't do what we do. Like I said, we started as a collaborative, and now today we are actually repairing homes and working directly alongside clients through case management, intern program, and volunteer program, and our repair program. So we have kind of started at the bottom or started at the very beginning as just a collaborative group, and have grown over the years to meet the needs of Craven County. Sorry, I have a cold, so I'm trying to suck on a mint while I'm talking.
Thank you, Kitti. Next slide, please, Liz. So there are a lot of different ways that long-term recovery groups are ran. Many are volunteer ran. A lot of times that continues on for quite some time. It is not uncommon for long-term recovery groups to never have staff. Those volunteer roles fill the board of directors, committees, and even positions such as case managers and project leaders, office managers, administrative, all kinds of things. Some of the common committees that you'll see in long-term recovery groups are volunteer committees, case management, donations, communication, emotional and spiritual support, construction, housing, and financial. Some of these committees will often go dormant as they're not as needed or not as filled. But most of the time that volunteer case management, communication, and emotional and spiritual support committees, those always stay generally pretty active in a long-term recovery group. Anybody who's working with cases needs at minimum those committees active. Staff can be very beneficial for consistency purposes, getting tasks completed in a timely manner, dependability, and continuity. As we all know, especially as things get harder in the economy and whatnot, it's hard to run an organization with just solely volunteers. Some organizations are able to do it, and that is wonderful. For others, it doesn't work as easy. We have one part-time and 2 full-time people here. And there are days that we could definitely use about 10 of us. So a lot of times the larger the organization, the more staff is needed. But you always make it work. Interns can be used to fill some roles when financial restrictions prevent having a full staff. We're going to go into a little bit of depth of this a little bit later, but interns have definitely benefited quite a few, especially if organizations don't have those funds for that staffing. I know when the CCDRA started out, it was completely volunteer ran. We did not have staff on board until December following Florence. Is that correct, Kitti?
Actually, it was 2020, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, so it was volunteer ran up till then. We kind of depended on Endeavors, who is the state contracted case management program. We use them for the case management, use volunteers to help some of that resource table stuff. And it got to be to where we just had too many people coming through the door, too many clients. We were quite impacted here in Craven County. So change had to be made. Next slide, please, Liz. To fill in some of those blue skies, there are a couple things that we do. We have a goal here of wanting to stay active through blue skies, gray skies, whatever sky it may be. We don't want to have to try to regroup after the next storm. So some things that we do in between is we really focus on preparedness. We hold hurricane expos. We do preparedness classes in person and virtually. The orange folder that you see there is a orange packet that we put out into the community filled with all kinds of preparedness information. And we will actually go to commonly affected neighborhoods or some of the underserved neighborhoods. And we try to make sure that they're as educated as possible on preparedness, checking insurance, how to prepare their home, preparing financially. Anything that we can do. And we also do one-on-one preparedness information as well, especially to some of our more regularly hardest hit areas. We will not hesitate to go out to someone's home and try to give them the best advice that we can possibly give them for their home, help them understand some of their documentations and needs that fits their personal situation. Next slide, please. Long-term recovery groups after a storm get quite busy. They'll often send volunteers out into the neighborhood, educating residents on what to do. So, kind of that sequence of delivery. Go file for FEMA immediately. Call your insurance company immediately. Call the long-term recovery group immediately. Notify your church, work, bank, some of that important information of what to do. We do case management and a resource table to bring everyone around one table. And we're going to talk about that in depth in just a second. Or we will send them to the state contracted case management entity or another case management entity if that long-term recovery group does not have case management at that time. Emergency repairs, tarping, emotional, spiritual support is really big for us. Getting them to FEMA, assisting emergency management any way that we can. be that use of our facilities or helping them in neighborhoods, whatever we can do to help them out. Providing emergency supplies, tarps, water, ice, flood buckets, being kind of that location for disbursement if needs be. Next slide, please. Case management is vital for a long-term recovery group. It helps us stretch the funds. We have to protect those dollars, make sure that we're giving those funds to, or providing those resources to the people who need it the most, not, you know, people who unfortunately took insurance money and went to Jamaica instead. We want to make sure we're not duplicating services or resources. Making sure that the long-term recovery group is the last pot of funding spent. We generally get the smallest pots of money. We don't get the multi-million-dollar donations that some organizations get. So we've got to make sure that we can stretch it as far as possible. Preventing duplication of services, checking eligibility requirements, and that helps reduce the case management work on partners who may not have case management abilities. We're really good partners with Baptist on Mission here in Craven County, and they don't have a whole lot of case management abilities. So our case management tends to step in and try to help them field some of that. Confidentiality is huge in case management. We gather a lot of PII. We try to make sure that we maintain blind process wherever possible to reduce some bias, and having conversations with applicants on what they're comfortable with as far as sharing their story. We try to be very conscious that this is a traumatic event for most people involved. And the last thing that, you know, or one of the things that we see a lot is, you know, some of our clients haven't even told their family or friends that they were flooded out. They're embarrassed, they're ashamed that they can't help themselves, whatever that looks like. So we always have an in-depth conversation with our client about what that can look like. We need to be able to tell a story, so we want to be able to share pictures, but maybe we don't use names. Maybe we make sure there's no family pictures in the backgrounds, whatever that may look like. And then emotional and spiritual support is huge at a local level. We always make sure that, you know, we can fix a home all day long, but if we're not making sure that that mental capacity is being repaired as well, are we actually making them resilient for the next storm? Are we actually making them ready for the next one? So we provide a lot of emotional, spiritual support, some active listeners. And if they need more than just an active listener, then we have partners that can help with professional therapy or psychiatric help, whatever that may be. We would just want to make sure that they know they're being advocated for. And that's really big on a local level for a lot of long-term recovery groups. These are our friends, these are our neighbors, these are our families. So we want to make sure that they're ready. Next slide, please. A couple ways of meeting unmet needs. The Unmet Needs Committee is one way that long-term recovery groups will do this, where they'll have a committee often made up of board members or regular volunteers, and they'll hear the cases from the case managers or get a kind of referral paper detailing some of the information. And then that committee will make a decision of if they're able to provide assistance or if referrals are needed or whatnot. One thing that we do is that resource table, where we gather all of the case managers, all of the active partners in our community, and we bring them around one table in one meeting. The case managers go through all of their cases that need assistance. They'll give us important household dynamics about if that person's an elderly person, if they're a veteran, what's that income level look like? Kind of explaining some of that eligibility requirement, indicate what the needs are, and then the partners will start raising hands. We can help with the repairs. We can look at furniture. We can help with rental assistance, whatever that may look like. That helps minimize referrals. We don't want a client to be referred to 20 different partners, if at all possible. We do it blind, making sure that somebody's got something against so-and-so's aunt, that they're not going to find out about it in the meeting, because they're not going to get that name before they make a decision on if they want to look at that or not. And then that helps minimize that applicant having to go through as many different partners, or telling their story over and over and over, or signing 10 different applications. Next slide, please.
And Kristi, I was just going to say real quick that having the ability to have all the partners around the table was unique in Craven County. And what we heard a lot around from other folks in the state was that all of our partners shared their information with us. So we were kind of seen as the collector of the information, and the ones that were following these cases to say, to help that client walk through their recovery while working with each of the different partners that we've worked alongside. So it was unique in Craven County that all of the partners did share their information with us and their clients with us. So we didn't have that duplication.
Yes. And then interns. Internships can be vital to LTRGs. We use them a lot. We use social work interns primarily for case management. We generally have 1 to 3 social work interns at any given time that is operating our case manager or our cases. It can be beneficial because it's generally low cost or even no cost. And it is a short-term solution, but even short-term solutions help us long-term. Being able to develop those students helps us also build that relationship with the college or university. And that in itself has many advantages. We can get additional volunteers, work groups, donations. We often get the intel on different training or workforce development programs that our employees or interns may be eligible to participate in. Use of meeting space, or if we need a conference room, we can call some of our colleges and they would provide it for us. So it helps in more than one way. Next, please. There are a lot of pros, and I prefer complications, not cons, of internships. It is low to no cost, generally. Even if it is a paid internship, it's often generally more affordable than the average hourly wage or salary. We've seen a lot of interest built in our interns in disaster. They had no idea the work that's done in disaster. And as they've come here to do their internship, they found a passion that they had no idea existed because they didn't know about this world. Which can lead to further volunteering by them or their friends or family. And we've even in the past hired on some of our interns as staff. So, and they often bring a fresh perspective, new ideas. We've gotten quite a bit of different techniques in case management, whatnot, that we've learned from those social workers who are studying it for 4 years. So it's quite beneficial in those areas. Next. Some of the complications, I don't call it a con because it's not something that I would want to deter anybody from having interns, but it can make it complicated. Supervision can be hard to maintain, especially for volunteer-ran organizations. Most internships do need that full-time person that can supervise them while the interns are working with the organization. And some internships do require specific requirements like a bachelor in social work or a licensed clinical social work licensure. So that can be complicated for some organizations. Paid internships are becoming more and more common. Many students are unable to do unpaid internships. So the interest in unpaid internships is really depleting, getting to where you need to be able to support those interns for them to be able to be with you. And most internships are very short term, less than 16 weeks. So new interns have to be trained every 3 to 4 months. And it often takes them a few weeks for them to adjust and acclimate. So the turnaround time can be a little complicated, but we definitely reap more benefits in the end, especially seeing that passion develop. So it's definitely something we continue, and we always encourage other LTRGs to utilize if they can. And that's all I've got, I think. Next should be Bob, right? There you go. Thank you.
Am I unmuted now?
You
I'm
are,
unmuted.
Bob. We can hear you.
Okay. That was excellent, Kristi. Detail that you gave, all of that information was incredibly important. The Pamlico Disaster Recovery Coalition was basically formed after Irene. After Irene, it was a volunteer organization, and it only lasted a couple of years after that. It was again in Florence that it resurfaced and became kind of a really running organization where we've got staff and a sort of a larger collection of volunteers. Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. Successful to strong management is not really from the top down as much as it is from the organization itself. Linda McDonald, the director, keeps everything flowing. Jim Fletcher, case manager. So the number of cases that we've had means that Jim has basically gone out to over 500 homes and assessed them for either disposition to go elsewhere, that we can't help, or that we do help them. Next slide, please. And that whole effort between the case manager and the executive and the director is just a dance between getting all of the things that they need to have done coordinated with the workforce, mostly volunteer help coming from faith-based groups, and then of course contractors where needed. Next slide. I mentioned that we had over 500 applicants, and Jim Fletcher had to basically go out and see 500 homes to make an assessment of what was going to go on that. And at the end of the day, and we are now down to the final homes, we've repaired 270. You can see there's over $2 million in grant monies that came through different sources listed there. Next slide. And the major takeaway on this slide is that we estimate that we basically have about $7 million between the grants, the donations, the material, but mostly the volunteer hours that have come. Fuller Center put together 26 homes in Craven and 23 in Pamlico. And given the population difference, we're at 12,000 people. I think Craven, you're at 20-some thousand. We were very fortunate to have a number of homes worked on. So the benefit for us has been that the Fuller Center basically seemed to work well with us because just that we were organized in a way that they seemed to, that worked best for them. Next slide. What I really want to focus on is that's where we've been. I want to focus on where we're going. Most of the long-term recovery groups are beginning to die out, and that's mainly due to lack of money. And so I applied for some grant money, and we got a big slug of money from the state. to do three things. One was to finish, now it's only 3 or 4 homes left that we have to finish out of the 700 and the 500 that we initially looked at, and then took on 270 of those homes. So we're nearly done. What we're trying to do, though, is an important thing as I see it, and that is everybody believes we're going to have another storm. And the question is, what are you doing to get ready for another storm? And so we're going to try something. We're going to try a mitigation program where we look at what we can do for about 30 homes to figure out the best way to prepare them for another storm. The test will be, if the repairs we identify work, then a mitigation program has some promise. So this is going to be a pilot. The other pilot area is in the mold problem. As you all know, mold is one of the biggest problems after a storm, flooding, because those damp crawl spaces they don't go away, and that mold creeps up into the sheetrock. So we're going to get some effort to try and pull a study out on how to address the mold. Next slide, please. The hardest part about all of this is proof. Did what we try to do with heading off the effects of a heavy storm by getting ahead of the curve, by repairing basically the roofs, the siding, and the doors and windows, is that actually going to work? And the other question then, of course, is this mold question. How are we going to make that work? Next slide, please. So we're going to take on 30 homes with what I mentioned, the roofs, the doors, windows, and siding. And we're going to see with a series of measurable points, when we identify those 30 homes and repair those 3-4 items, to what extent that has a positive impact on their ability to withstand a future storm. And we're going to use that as closely as we can measure the repairs. Are we having to go back to those 30 homes and fix them again? Tells me that approach is not going to necessarily work. But the pilot is going to be important, because if it does work, we can go after more money. Next slide. So the mold is a different challenge. There are professional companies that tackle mold. Unfortunately, that is an extremely pricey approach, and it takes professional work to handle that sort of thing. And where it is really challenging, we're going to address the mold by tearing out what exists in the terms of sheetrock and soft places for mold to gather. But the real thing we're going to try to do is take on some products that theoretically address the killing of mold. We're applying, for example, to a company in Austin, Texas, that has a slurry that, if applied to mold in a crawl space, theoretically, it's going to kill that mold and strengthen the material that is now softened up through the long-term wetness that it has. We're going to employ a kind of a team of people to identify how you judge success from that project. And it's probably going to take about 2 years. Part of that team is going to be with the Duke students that we have. The Duke students that we're getting 3 to 4 a year through the Global Health Department. What they've done for us in the past is a tracking system for all of the home repairs we're involved with. Most importantly, they've integrated us into the health department. And that goes into that mold piece. We are seeing a lot of respiratory problems. We're believing, but don't know that it's associated with the mold. We've got to kind of document that, and that's what those students are going to be doing. And then helping us prepare the metrics for the mitigation program. Last slide. The last thing we're trying to do is join with others. And that's the CCARES thing that is mentioned in this slide of joining with 3 other counties, Jones, Carteret, and Craven, and Pamlico, to actually see if we can pull together that coalition to create, with the help of funding, a more powerful, larger organization. Each of the counties will retain control of their areas because they know best what they need. But the effort to pull everybody together and make a more powerful presentation to both the state and funders is the way that I believe the future is going to be, and that is this effort to collaborate. That's what I've got for now. So let's tune it over back to you and go after questions.
Thank you for these wonderful presentations. Now I am opening the floor for questions about everything that was presented. Does anyone have any questions? And you can add the questions in the chat room as the chat box as well. Okay. Now I do want to make a comment, Bob. It is, you know, as a person who had previously managed a LTRG, I know how challenging it is to keep an LTRG afloat. So the fact that your LTRG or your organization was able to secure a grant that will be able to keep you guys opened and also providing, you know, services that will be able to make your community more resilient is amazing. Any advice that you can give, because I do see some other attendants here who are LTRG directors. Any advice you can give them about how to be able to get into these studies and secure monies for their organizations?
3 things I would advise. One is to have clarity in your request for what that money might be used for. Secondly, that there are outcomes that you're going to be accountable for. What is it that you're expecting to look for? And it can be bad. I mean, it can be that this doesn't work is as valuable to know as it does work. And the third is that the monies have to be, I was going to say sustainable, but the monies that are going to be easiest to attract are from foundations that are looking for this concept of resilience and climate change management. And the other is your local politician. They respond to requests, and that request, if you give them the specifics, is something that they can work with.
Great, thank you for that information. I have a, let's see, Rylan Nilsson, on the discussion about college interns. I work at UNC Chapel Hill and will be interested in hearing from anyone who is interested in interns. And he has posted his information in the chat box. Let's see, does anyone else have any questions related to the topics presented today?
Luce, this is George. Kristen Pollack with Catholic Charities in the western part of the state asked about initiating long-term recovery groups following a disaster. The local emergency manager is usually the one who determines if help from outside the community is necessary. And he would generally go to the state EOC and request help through the official channels that way. And that's how North Carolina VOAD would most likely get informed. But if something happens locally that doesn't seem to really require the county going outside of the county and going to the state, it can work like they did in Nash County following the tornado episode in the spring, and call their local groups together, or in that case, North Carolina VOAD was not notified until much later in the process. But if you know we're available, and if you're on this video, you know that we are available, contact NC VOAD through our website or through my email address or Kristi's email address, and we will bring all of the partners with us. Generally, the way VOAD works, prior to a hurricane or a disaster that we know is going to happen, we will have a nationwide actually call of all the partners in disaster recovery and determine where our shortfalls are and where our strengths are and how we might prepare for a disaster. So we generally, in a hurricane situation or a bad cold weather event like this, we would meet ahead of time and set an agenda when we would meet again. And then following the disaster, we would follow up on it. So the state VOAD has been very good working with North Carolina Emergency Management and the governor's office in working as best we can. So sometimes there are those small events, small straight line windstorm that could probably damage 3 or 4 houses in a community, that it's possible the emergency manager might not even get called. But that would be where to start, and then he could hook up with the North Carolina VOAD and bring in those agencies like Samaritan's Purse or Baptists on Mission, who have chainsaw teams and shelter teams and even feeding teams. So we have a very robust response here in North Carolina. All we need is the information that there is a need for us to respond. And sometimes that gets blocked because a county doesn't want to ask the state for help, or it's right on that borderline where they think they can handle it themselves. And sometimes they get into trouble thinking that way, but we can come to the rescue. So keep us in mind next time it happens. And Luz has our number. If you get in touch with the governor's office, they'll find us as well.
So we have 2 comments here, one from Mary Glasscock. Excellent presentations. I learned a great deal how the VOAD intertwines within the disaster chain can be a fuzzy concept. Thank you. And then Alice Sharpton, hey Kristen, Bunca County established a COAD in 2020. There was a team member from Buncombe Emergency Management as the chair for the COAD, and he was promoted, and the person who took his place from the county did not continue as I had hoped. I have been waiting to reach out to emergency management to find out what happened and how to get our COAD back up and going. George, is this something that maybe NC VOAD will be able to support conversations?
Yes, Alice, North Carolina VOAD was a participant in the initial calls that set up that COAD. I guess I was not convincing enough in my conversation. There is a real issue with the term COAD, and there is a, what do they call it, a copyright or some kind of legal ramification that forbids other people from using COAD. So National VOAD has asked us not to use the term COAD, and they would prefer to see us use VOAD. In any case, we're here to help you reestablish if you will make that contact with your local emergency manager and get back with me, we'll be happy to do what we can to rejuvenate that group.
Okay, I don't see any more comments or questions in the chat box. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay. Well, since we have reached the end of our presentation, next presentation will be January 31st at 1 p.m. We will have Emily Galloway from FEMA. She's a recovery planning coordinator and community assistance for FEMA Region 4, and she will be presenting about interagency recovery coordinations, an introduction to federal disaster recovery coordination. So please be on the lookout for that link. I will be sending it out the end of this week for everyone to register to her presentation. Thank you for attending today's session, and stay warm. And I will see you all during next presentation.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Luz.
Thank you. Great job, George, and all of you who presented today.
Thank you.